Thieu imposed a curfew in Saigon. American civilians began to pack up. Outgoing commercial flights were jammed, but the U.S. mission refused to disclose its evacuation plans, either for Americans or for Vietnamese who might be special targets for the communists.
We had to fear that if we evacuated too rapidly, the South Vietnamese government, in its frustration, might turn on us and there might be a massacre of Americans. Secondly, we wanted to withdraw at a measured pace so that the North Vietnamese would be concerned that if they moved too fast, we might intervene in order to save the remaining Americans.
On April 11th, U.S. carriers dispatched Marines on another evacuation mission to get the last Americans out of neighboring Cambodia. Communist insurgents were poised to take Phnom Penh, its capital. Despite the defeat in Cambodia, the United States still hoped to hang on in Saigon.
We assembled a large fleet of South Vietnam for evacuation purposes. And I attempted a rather forlorn negotiation to ease the transition by creating a coalition government in Saigon and implying that that fleet might be there for purposes other than simply evacuation, and proposed some sort of coalition effort, which was not refused initially.
Le Duc Tho, Kissinger's former negotiating partner, joined General Dung in the field. They weighed their options as they braced for battle. If they could crush the Saigon regime, negotiations with the Americans would be unnecessary. Thieu's forces prepared to confront them in Long Con province at Xuan Loc, on the main road to Saigon. They moved into position on April 12th. General Le Minh Dao defied the communists.
I will hold Long Con. I will knock them down here, even if they bring here 2 divisions or 3 divisions.
At Saigon's Tan Son Nhut airport, the embassy began to evacuate Vietnamese who might be in danger.
I arrived out at the air base, walked into the theater. There were hundreds, maybe several thousands of Vietnamese there, and at that point, of course, we'd been charged with the evacuation of American dependents. That was the only mandate that I had at the time. And there was a palpable sense of hysteria in the air.
At Xuan Loc, South Vietnamese troops held their ground under relentless shell fire, finally yielding as General Dung threw 3 divisions against them. On April 21st, the remnants of Thieu's troops were rescued as women and children and the wounded struggled for space on the flights out. That same day, pressed to make way for a leader who might reach a deal with the communists, President Thieu resigned. His successor was the aged Vice President, Tran Van Hung. The communists promptly rejected Hung. At daybreak on April 28th, South Vietnamese troops faced North Vietnamese commandos at the Newport Bridge. They were at the gates of Saigon. In Saigon and Washington, faint hopes for a political settlement persisted. Huong was replaced by Duong Van Minh, regarded as a figure the communists might accept. As Minh spoke, a thunderstorm erupted. The communists had beat the rainy season to the capital. General Dung had met his deadline. The morning of April 29th, 1975. Tan Son Nhut Airport was under fire, preventing passenger planes from taking off. But Ambassador Martin was still reluctant to begin a full-scale helicopter evacuation.
North Vietnamese artillery was falling intermittently on the airfield. We no longer had any capability to use fixed-wing airplanes, that is, for the evacuation because of the artillery fire on the airstrip. I told the ambassador that we didn't have a great deal of time left, that we would probably have to leave that night. He went into my other office where I still had one secure telephone operating, and at that time got authority to begin the evacuation from the embassy.
The word went out. All Americans and Vietnamese at risk would be taken out by helicopter to U.S. aircraft carriers. Officials quickly designated departure points at the airport, the U.S. Embassy, and elsewhere in the capital.
I got together with the Marine captain that was responsible at that point for organizing the convoys of buses that would go into the city.
Yes, but how are we getting to the helicopters?
Oh, well, they're going to come in and pick us up from points around Tan Son Nhut.
Around Tan Son Nhut?
Yes.
How much baggage, Captain?
Will you please, one small handbag.
I discovered that he did not have a very good knowledge of where some of the pickup points were in the city, where everyone had been told to form up. So I assisted him in getting some of the buses together.
I have a woman over here. Please part. Come on, gents. Let's move it.
Come on.
All right, please stop pushing. One at a time.
We spent the better part of the morning and the early afternoon running convoys back and forth from Saigon back out to Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base. The people that I described as high-risk Vietnamese were not high-risk merely because they'd had a close association with us in the past, but because we believed that if they stayed behind and were captured, that their lives would be in jeopardy once the North Vietnamese took over. As a consequence, these people were mortally scared.
Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé, madame? Avec la sœur. Elle est là-bas. Non. Il y a des Vietnamiens qui sont... No.
While here, I met my friend's widow, who I've known about for some 10 years.
Vietnamese friend?
Oh, yes. We went to school together at Washington State University. I was very concerned about reprisals to the family, so I turned to help them if I could, and I couldn't get anyone out. The widow was gotten out earlier through embassy help, but not the others.
The embassy was completely surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of Vietnamese at the three entrances. It was impossible, if you were Oriental, virtually, to get into the grounds of the embassy at that point in time.
Hey, get out!
By late afternoon, most Americans and thousands of Vietnamese had reached the U.S. carriers offshore. Thousands more Vietnamese were waiting in Saigon. Some South Vietnamese pilots ditched their aircraft in the South China Sea.
Whoa, he's Lucky. He's lucky he didn't fall over on top of him and chop him to pieces.
The feeling in the city was one of almost total chaos at this point. Anarchy, virtual anarchy, was beginning to break out in various streets that we'd attempted to go down. There were armed soldiers in half uniforms, combined Air Force, Marine, Army types that had obviously begun the task of looting and taking advantage of the disorder and confusion that prevailed at that point in time.
Sau khi đã thoát thân ra khỏi
After escaping from Vietnam and landing on the American carriers, I must admit that those of us who had been in responsible positions felt kind of ashamed and dishonored.
đã cảm thấy xấu hổ, nhục nhã. Nhận xét tất cả những sự việc xảy ra.
To me, it seemed that everything that happened during the last days of South Vietnam had been arranged in advance. That the Vietnamese officers at the lower echelons could do to prevent the situation from coming apart.
Ở những đơn vị thấp cũng không có phương thức gì có thể ngăn cản nổi.
I felt that the United States, particularly the Congress, because they were making the policy, had betrayed a trust that the United States had given South Vietnam. And since I represented the United States, I also felt that I was personally betrayed. I had also made implied promises that the United States would honor the agreements that we had made at the time of the ceasefire. And then, when things got really tough, we really just cut and run.